While we are still reeling from the Mikko Rantanen trade, and on the heels of that move, we figured on the Denver Sports Podcast today, let's do a deep dive and look at some of the most shocking trades in Denver sports history, and also how that's impacted the teams that we know and love today. That's coming up next right here on the Denver Sports Podcast. What's up, everyone? Welcome in to Studio B here in the DNVR studios. And we've got a great show for you guys on hand today. It's the Denver Sports Podcast, and we are breaking down some of the biggest, most shocking trades in Denver sports history, in Colorado sports history, not just here in Denver, but in Colorado sports history. Welcome, everyone, to the show. Christian Saez, Justin Michael, with the CSU Rams beat, and also now a member of the DNVR Avalanche beat as well, joining me on the show. Justin, welcome in, man. Glad to have you as a part of the show. Glad to talk a little trades here on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited. It was fun kind of going through the history and going down memory lane a little bit, looking at a lot of these trades. I'm excited to get into it with you. And I certainly picked an interesting time to get involved with the Avalanche. So a lot happening, a lot to discuss. It should be fun.
It should be. And I don't envy you to a degree, because the Avalanche stuff was shocking in some ways. But I think, there's a difference between shocking and surprising, right? Shocking being like this wow and awe factor of this moment of realization of like, man, this really happened. And the implications of this and the intensity of this and how this can kind of cause ripple effects moving down the road. But I think for a lot of people, there's this argument of like, this wasn't a surprise trade by the Avalanche because of the conversations that we've already seen. And I don't want to go too deep into the whole idea of, I don't want to talk too much about the Mikko trade, just because I know you guys are talking about that a lot on the Avalanche trade, or on the Avalanche podcast. But, in your eyes, just to kind of start all of this conversation off, was the Mikko Rantanen trade a shocker to you when you saw that news come down the pipeline?
I think it's shocking in a sense that it actually did happen. The writing had kind of been on the wall. The contract negotiations had been a big storyline that had been looming throughout the season. I kind of assumed that he would, take a hometown discount or whatever to stay with Nathan MacKinnon and Cale Makar. Didn't happen in the end. I think there were trades that were a lot more out of the blue, and we'll probably talk about them today. But it is one of those, he had been a significant member. I mean, he's top 10 statistically in basically every major category. He'd been with the organization for a decade. So from that sense, it's shocking that, you're willing to move on from a player that's been a staple of all this success now, one of the most successful periods in franchise history. I said one of, not the most, but one of. And, to me, it's just kind of a classic example of this is business. It's shocking from an emotional standpoint, but when you look at it from the standpoint of they've got to pay Cale Makar in a couple years, they've got Nathan MacKinnon for a big deal on the books. The math just didn't really add up, and he wanted to maximize this deal. So no, I don't think it's surprising, but is it shocking that it actually happened and that this core is now essentially done? A little bit, I think.
Yeah. And that's the difference between shocking and surprising. It's the emotions that I think come up with this. And part of this show, a lot of what we're going to talk about on the show is the emotions that we all felt and reminiscing on those emotions when all of these trades went down. Some of them positive, some of our trades that we've had happen that we'll throw out on this list ended up in, positively changing the trajectory of our teams. And some of them, specifically in the baseball world, I think really negatively impacted the trajectory of our team. So we're going to unpack a lot of that as we go. But, while we're on the topic, let's talk a little bit about some of the Avs trades that we've seen across the span of the Colorado Avalanche history. And I think you can't really go any further when you're talking about most shocking trades for the Avalanche without talking about the Patrick Waugh deal and the deal that brought him to Colorado. And, the Canadiens basically trading Patrick Waugh just weeks after, or within a week maybe, if I'm remembering correctly, of him requesting a trade and getting not a lot in return from him, and sending a guy with all this value to Colorado. That was, I think, one of those trades that just was shocking, not only for Avs fans, but for the NHL world as a whole, because you see the deal that the Avs got out of that. That one, I think, still has some people reeling.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can make an argument that it's one of the most significant trades in NHL history. Now, Wayne Gretzky got traded at some point, so anybody can get traded, don't get me wrong. But for the Avs to bring in a goalie who's in the conversation for the top guy ever at his position, it's just monumental. And obviously they won 2 championships because of it. They had an opportunity to win a couple more if things would have gone their way in some of those deep playoff runs in the late 90s. But I mean, I think it's like that and the Elway trade. And obviously we'll talk about that like later on. But when I think of the most impactful, just biggest trades in the history of Colorado sports, you have to bring up the Patrick Waugh deal for sure.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you at all. In the Toyota chat, we say, Beto was saying, as sad as I was to see Moose leave, I hold firm that it makes way for Landy to come back and in a way paves a path for Sid to join McKinnon before he retires. I was actually texting my buddy who's a New Jersey Devils fan, and talking like before we kind of knew what the return was going to be for Moose. I'm like, hey, does this somehow going to mean that Crosby's going to be joining the Avs? And while that sounds like a lot of fun, and there's a possibility that could happen at some point, I think the Avs got a really good deal out of the Mikko Rantanen trade. At least the upside is there. Now, obviously, we don't like to see Rantanen go to the wind. We don't like seeing him get tossed aside, especially when there's money involved and all of that kind of stuff. But there's high potential upside in the guys that you got in return for him. And I agree. I mean, I think it could make way for Landy to come back. Now, is Landy going to be the player that he was before he got injured? That's still the big question mark at this point. But I think it's too early for us to decide whether or not this was a win or a loss for the Avs. But I don't necessarily think we're leaning one way or the other. If anything, I think we're leaning more towards this might end up being a win for the Avs. This could push them a little closer to becoming a Stanley Cup team.
If you're talking about 1-for-1 replacement, you're almost never going to win this type of trade in terms of like, man, we both got superstars out of it. He's one of the best goal scorers in the NHL, and he had a contract dispute, which means other teams have a little bit of leverage in the trade. And so, all things considered, I think they got a nice little haul for him. Drury is a good face-off winning center, and Nietzsche can fly, and he looked great against the Rangers on Sunday, or Boston. I can't remember which order they played the 2 games, but I'm bummed, obviously, but like I said at the beginning, business is business, and the nice thing is you do have a little bit of cap flexibility to work with because of this move. You've got some up and coming talent, and there's a very good chance this isn't the final, move of this season. So, well, if I had to guess, the roster they have now is not what they're in the playoffs with. Totally,
and look, the Avs made a good move earlier, and they're picking up Wedgwood and Blackwood to fill your goaltender spot. So it's like I remember when I was actually talking about this on TDSP with Big E, and I was saying, look, if the Avs don't make a single move after this, like that's good enough. Obviously we want them to kind of fine tune some things, but like that was enough. The goaltending spot was the biggest area of growth that the Avs needed to address. They did. We're all happy with that. Now losing Mikko is tough, but I do think it was more of a calculated decision. Now, when we're talking about like most shocking trades across all of Colorado sports, and we're starting off the show talking about the Avs and some of the trades that the Avs have made or received, been on the receiving end of some of these trades, you kind of look back on those and you look at it from, like you said, the business perspective, and you say, like, what lens was the front office approaching that trade, viewing that trade through? And so I go back to the whole Patrick Waugh, deal, and how, the Canadians kind of just shipped him off for relatively nothing in the terms of the deal that Patrick Waugh was. And I think, one of the commentaries I was reading when I was kind of researching this too, is that, like, this was a prime example of a GM kind of panicking, when a guy says, I want out, I want to trade, and saying, we want to get rid of him, we need to move on. And the GM panics and ends up getting almost nothing for the guy in return. The Avs have been on the positive side of some of those deals. We've seen time and time again across all the sports, GMs, panic when their star players start to have issues with them. And in this regard, I don't think, McFarland panicked in this situation. I think this was with Mikko. I think this was a situation where, like you said, it was unfortunate, but there were calculated decisions being made behind the scenes, and this was the way they decided to move forward.
The writing had been on the wall. I know there's a lot of debate now, especially because there have been some comments publicly from Mikko and his camp about, we were blindsided and we wanted to stay in Colorado. And I kind of roll my eyes at some of that, because I think if he truly wanted to be an Av more than anything, and again, this is business and I don't fault him for it, but if it was that important to him, I think they probably would have come to some type of deal, because I think the Avs wanted Mikko. I think it was just a number they couldn't reach. And so it is what it is. And we knew that was coming for a while, or that it was at least a very likely possibility.
Totally. And look, this isn't baseball either, like where, guys are taking a pay cut from $765 million a year down to $700 million a year. Like, this is the NHL where you're fighting over, a couple $1 million a year. Like, it's, yes, these guys are making incredible money, but it's not the same. And even when you're looking in terms of the NFL, and the NBA. So keep that in mind, that, a couple $1 million to an NHL guy is a lot of money, just in the grand scheme of things, because you have to look at the longevity of the contracts that you see in the NHL. Now, I want to go over some of these, the lists that we got. AJ did send his list into us. I think he actually commented on your tweet yesterday, giving his take on this. He said Patrick Waugh, Ray Bourque, Rob Blake, Eric Johnson, which was another one I forgot about, Matt Duchene, Devon Taves, he said with a wink, and then Mikko Rantanen. Eric Johnson, although I think that one was shocking, it was more shocking emotionally, because, again, you go back to this guy that just won a Stanley Cup with your team. His vibes were just so high, and then you moved on from Eric Johnson, and that it just felt like it kind of was the first Band-Aid that you had to rip off after winning that Stanley Cup. Him and Kadri basically felt like those first two Band-Aids that you kind of ripped off for Avs fans.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he meant when EJ was coming or when he was leaving, because he was a top 5 pick with St. Louis back in the day. The Avs bring him in, and he obviously ends up being one of the longest tenured athletes in Colorado of the period, along with like Von Miller and Charlie Blackmon. He was kind of that staple piece, the carryover piece of the rough years into the success, which definitely made it tough for him to go. The Avs have had a lot of success, though, when it comes to those key additions. You mentioned Rob Blake. He's an all-star defenseman for the Kings when the Avs bring him in 2001. He's going to be a free agent at the end of the year. The Avs take a big swing, kind of like what Carolina's doing with Rantanen, to be honest. You're going all in, trying to win the cup. They win that cup with Rob Blake. He ends up staying for a couple of years. The Avs probably should have won another cup after that, in like 2004. Didn't work out. Devon Taves, they got for a couple of second rounders, and he ends up being a key piece in a Stanley Cup win. To me, that was kind of the thing I tried to focus on with my list, was making sure I didn't miss key moves that happened right before championship winning teams. And like, we'll get into the Nuggets and the Broncos and all the other stuff. I don't want to derail us here, but I think the Avs especially have been on the winning side of more significant trades than they've been on the losing side.
I love that you say that, because in just a moment, we're going to talk about a team that's been on the losing side of pretty much every single trade they've made in the history of their franchise. That is the Colorado Rockies. And we'll kind of go down the list as we continue on our show of most shocking trades in Colorado sports history. And we will maybe do a little ranting here in just a few minutes on some of the negative trades that we've seen in Colorado sports. But before we get into that, got to take a break, give some love over to our friends at Breck Brew. Breck Brew is the official craft beer of DNVR and one of my personal favorites. We were talking about the Avalanche just a moment ago. And when I moved to Colorado, I moved to Denver in the year that the Kraken became a thing. I moved from Seattle, moved to Denver the year the Kraken became a thing, but I grew up without a hockey team. So I felt pretty warranted feeling like, you know what, the Avs are my team. Like, this is my adopted team. I don't have a hometown team that I grew up rooting for, so the Avs are my team. And when I came to the DNVR bar for the first time, I got a chance to try an Avalanche Amber Ale, and my God, I have not looked back. That is my favorite beer to date of any beer out there. Avalanche Amber Ale, my personal favorite, obviously built off of the Colorado Avalanche, but it is a great amber beer. But they have some awesome beers over at Breck Brew. As I mentioned, my favorite, the Avalanche Amber Ale. Mile High City, that's based off the Nuggets. Broncos Country Pale Ale. The Fun Slinger, one of my buddies, that's his favorite. Good Company Hard Seltzer. If you're not into the whole beer thing, they got the hard seltzer going on. It's just a great vibe. They also have a really cool farmhouse just right down the street, actually, from where I live over in Littleton, the Breck Brew Farmhouse. We've done a couple of shows from there. It's just an incredible beer company, brewery, and they do incredible work for over 33 years. They have been crushing it in the beer game. They also have a really cool giveaway coming up. That's the Breck Brew Ice Deck giveaway. 2 VIP tickets on the glass at an Avs game, March 28th versus St. Louis. It's with complimentary food and drink. You can head over to breckbrew.com/ice deck to enter. We'll also have the link in the show notes as well. Shout out to Breck Brew for being an incredible beer company. Also got to give a shout out to our friends over at Bet365, because at Bet365, we don't do ordinary. And look, TDSP is our all-inclusive sports show. We talk about anything and everything on TDSP. Avs, Nuggets, Broncos, Avs. Oh, I already said Avs. Rockies, there's the other team. We talk about it all here on TDSP. And the great thing is, you can bet on all of those sports as well with the Bet365 app. If you use code DNVR365 when you sign up, deposit $10, choose between either a bet and get offer by placing a bet of up to $5 or more, and getting $150 in bonus bets, or your first bet safety net offer by placing a bet of up to $1,000. And if your qualifying bet loses, you receive a matched refund in bonus bets. We've got some great sports betting going on the college basketball side of things as well. Justin, I know you cover CSU on the basketball side. I call college basketball games, although I don't cover a specific team. I do a handful of games with ESPN. Although I can't bet on those games that I do enjoy betting on, some of my other favorite teams, like my Gonzaga Bulldogs. They are running right now, playing Oregon State tonight. It's just a great time to be in the sports betting world. And with Bet365, like I said, you've got some great deals. Take advantage of those discounts. Use our code DNVR365. Must be 21 or older, physically located in Colorado. Please gamble responsibly. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. All right, back here on the Denver Sports Podcast, Christian Saez, CSU Rams and DNVR Avs beat writer, beat reporter, host, all of the above, Justin Michael on the show with us. All right, I'll ask you as we segue into this, what's your most shocking, if you had number one, like most shocking trade that just sent you reeling, positive or negative? What is it? What comes to mind first?
Probably the trade that from my childhood that most emotionally impacted me was when the Broncos traded Clinton Portis for Champ Bailey. I was young. I was in the 3rd grade, but I was a diehard Broncos fan. I had just gotten a Clinton Portis jersey for Christmas, and that April they traded him, my favorite player, for Champ Bailey. And I was livid. I was furious. I didn't like Champ Bailey the first season he was a Bronco. Obviously, it worked out pretty well for Denver in the end. Generational cornerback, one of the greatest to ever do it. But I just remember that being the first time of like, wait, what? You can just send my guy off? Like, what are you talking about? But yeah, that one broke my heart. But I'll go the other way too. The most stoked I was probably at the Allen Iverson trade.
Mm.
I was like late December. I think there was a blizzard at the time. I remember like shoveling and then coming in and it's like breaking news. The Denver Nuggets have traded for Allen Iverson. And you're just like, no freaking way. AI and Melo, like we are going to be so nasty. It ended up being a lot of fun. They didn't win anything significant, but those are like the two that come to mind for me in terms of big emotional impact.
Well, and they ended up getting Chauncey Billups eventually for Allen Iverson. So, I mean, it all came around in a full circle. But I think for me, and again, I out of full transparency, didn't grow up in Colorado. So a lot of these trades or deals I saw from the outside. But the most shocking trade for me, again, as an outsider, was Nolan Arenado. And I knew it even, granted, I was actually living in Colorado at the time. I was going to college when this happened. But I just remember like having this feeling of like, oh man, like that's the deal that they made. Like that's the end result that they ended up. I mean, you know, Nolan Arenado, we all know what he was and still is, truly. But the other part of it too was that like you gave up $50 million to do that. You know, you didn't really get anything crazy in return. And I think the hard part about the Nolan Arenado trade, now that we can look back on that with this, you know, 2020 or hindsight being 2020 type of thing, it scarred a lot of Rockies fans that I actually think completely changed how some Rockies fans view the franchise. I think if the Rockies didn't make the Nolan Arenado trade, yeah, like we'd all still be pretty pissed about, you know, back-to-back 100-loss seasons. You know, there'd be front office gripes, all of that kind of stuff. But I think people wouldn't be as bitter as they are today if it wasn't for the Nolan Arenado trade. I think that like there's some PTSD that comes up when any deal is made that the Rockies make, and then the Chris Bryant stuff happened and all that, you know, kind of snowballed. But the Nolan Arenado trade set all of that negative energy in motion from the Rockies front office.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I should have thrown that one out. If we're talking about as an adult, the biggest impact by far, the Nolan Arenado trade. I think you can make an argument it's the worst trade in Colorado sports history. You gave him and $50 million away for a bunch of dudes. I mean, I don't even remember the pieces that they got back for him.
I could tell you, Austin Gomber, Mateo Gil, Tony Losi, Jake Sommers, and Eluris Montero.
I know two of those names.
Yeah, same. That's my thoughts exactly.
Baseball truly was my first love. It was my favorite sport for the first 20 plus years of my life. I was all in. I watched 120 plus games every year. I watched spring training baseball when I was a kid. I mean, it's been a big part of my life. I played baseball. I coached baseball. I've umpired. I've site directed. It was a massive part of my life. And that day, my heart just went out. And I probably watch casually now 10 to 15 games a year. I've been to Coors Field twice since that trade occurred. It feels pointless. Now, all of the Dodgers stuff that has happened, and I'm not trying to derail us too far, like all of the Dodgers acquisitions since then have not done much in terms of reeling me back in and getting me back hooked on baseball. But I will say, I do think it's a thing that a lot of sports fans, even those of us that are checked out, would love to embrace wholeheartedly again. There just hasn't been anything that's made it happen. And I really hope it does, because I think Denver's a great baseball town. And I think people want to love this team. I mean, the 2007 tiebreaker game with my grandfather is my best sporting experience I've ever experienced. I've been to AFC championships. I've been to NCAA tournament games. I've been to all kinds of cool stuff that I just feel so thankful for, both as a fan and professionally. And that 2007 tiebreaker game in Coors Field is still the most electric atmosphere that I've ever been a part of. And I honestly really resent the Rockies for kind of making me lose it all, to be honest, because I do think it's just an amazing game, and I'm very frustrated.
No, I don't blame you, man. I'm glad I got you on the show so that you could let some of that, you know, inner frustrations out a little bit. You could kind of talk it through, because I get it, man. And when you're that connected to your team and it feels like they make a move that goes against everything the fans want. And look, again, we talked earlier about, GMs panicking. And I don't know if this was a GM panicking or if this was just a stupid decision. Maybe it's a little bit of both. Nolan Arenado wanted to get out of Colorado. Fine. That's all fine. And I don't think the fans really blamed him for that either. It's a little, ticked us off a little bit, but like no one's, blaming him from a business decision. It was what you got from that pissed the fans off. It was this idea that like you have this franchise player, this possible future Hall of Famer that's in his prime right now playing on your team, and you just give him away with a bow tie and say, here's $50 million for nothing. And like, that's what I think truly scarred a lot of the fans for the Rockies. And I think they're still reeling. I do think people are starting to heal a little bit from a bitterness standpoint.
I'm less angry.
Yeah, less angry. But I think part of that is just being numb, right? Like there's nothing good happening right now. So you're not upset. You're not happy. You're just kind of neutral.
It's just existing. Like baseball is just happening, and I'm just kind of outside it right now. And I don't know. I hope to come back to it, but I think you're spot on. The biggest difference between like that and say the Carmelo Anthony trade, which is a similar situation. The face of the franchise, he wants out. He's going to get out at some point. You can't lose that asset for nothing, but you can't give that asset away for a bag of rocks either. We feel like Charlie Brown and I got a rock, everybody else got candy. We got a rock in this trade. And
yes.
It did nothing to set you up for the future. Like if you had gotten these generational young talent that like everybody could embrace and okay, it's a new era. But like I said, I mean, we're baseball guys inherently, and I don't even know who those guys are that they traded for, like other than Gomber technically and Montero, but just frustrating, man.
Yeah, as my cousin will always say, you gave him up for a bag of sunflower seeds and some pocket lint, right? Like it's just the way it goes, man. Like, and that's what's pissed a lot of people off. Austin Gomber's still on the rotation, but he's not a franchise player. He's not going to be on this team. You're hoping at best that he's your middle starter this year, like at best, if not the last starter in your rotation. So yeah, I'm not going to go too deep into that.
Even if you could have got like the Matt Holliday return, I know we got to probably take a break here in a sec, but like I had a, same deal, massive Matt Holliday fan, had his jersey. It's a year removed from Rocktober. Everybody's kind of in on the Rockies, and they trade him off and people are upset at first, but it works out. I mean, you get Cargo, you get Houston Street. We said every Rockies trade's a disaster. There've been a few. You got Jorge De La Rosa back in the day. This one, those are about the only two I can think. Or DJ LeMahieu, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to say LeMahieu. Yeah, no, you're right. And I mean, the Matt Holliday Cargo one was good. I mean, that one felt even, and we took a step up from that, in the Rockies. Ubaldo Jimenez made the list on this one as well. Those are some like honorable mentions. But still, it's those big ones will stick around forever. Like those ones, whether they're good or bad, they'll stick around. Speaking of the good ones, though, let's talk a little bit about John Elway after the break, because that's a trade for the Broncos that stuck around for a long time, and I would argue the Broncos are who they are today because of Mr. John Elway. So we are going to talk about that in just a moment. But before we get to that, we got some cool events coming up very soon. January 31st. What is it today? Is it today the 28th? So that's in like 3 days. The 31st, we got a Nuggets watch party presented by Red Hawk Roofing. That's going to be 5:30 to 9:30 here in the DNVR bar. It is going to be a good time. The Nuggets, although the vibes are significantly down last night, the vibes are going to continue to turn back around because that's what the Nuggets do. I have faith in our Denver Nuggets, and they have been playing really, really well aside from last night. So get on board, get involved, be a part of that Nuggets watch party, January 31st, 5:30 to 9:30 p.m. But the big one, February 28th, and I know Justin knows all about this. At 5 p.m., we've got ourselves a top shelf event, the DNVR Avalanche Suite Takeover versus the Minnesota Wild. You are going to be in a suite with the Avs guys, drinking, eating, hanging out, watching hockey. Justin, are you going to be there at that Suite Takeover? Or are you
I
gonna
hope so. I might be the one that has to work that night and do the reporting while everyone else is having a good time, but I'll probably be there in some capacity.
You'll probably draw the short stick on that one. But, still going to be a good time. Justin will be watching at least, so you can communicate with him through all the socials like normal. But it's going to be a good time. On your screen, scan that QR code or go to thednvr.com/events for more. Also want to share some love with our buddies over at Empire Today, because if you are in the business or in the need of getting your floors replaced, redone, whatever it is, maybe you're like me and you've got dogs who scratch the heck out of your floors. Maybe it's just winter and that salt is just eating away at those floors. And you look down and you say, you know what? It's time to dig all this up, put some new floors in. And where do I start? How do I get myself going? Because that's a big project. Well, Empire Today, they have you covered. They are the best in the business when it comes to getting your new flooring not only installed, but making sure that it looks the way that you want to for a price that you are comfortable with. They've got quality service and speed, and they have some incredible designs that you can choose from to make sure that you get the floor that you really want. One of my favorite features that Empire Today has to offer, they've got a virtual floor designer. It's a great way to see how those floors are going to look in your living space. You take a picture of that living space, like a studio like this, and you get to see what the floor is going to look like, so you can pick and choose, make sure you get the floor of your dreams. Be sure to head over to EmpireToday.com. Schedule a free in-home estimate. All listeners of the show can receive $350 off when you use promo code DNVR. Restrictions apply. See EmpireToday.com/DNVR for details. John Elway to the Denver Broncos. The deal that started it all, it felt like, at least, in a franchise quarterback sense. It's the trade that Sean Payton calls the worst trade in the history of football. When it comes to the other side of that trade, the Denver Broncos received John Elway from the Baltimore Colts in 1983 in exchange for offensive tackle Chris Hinton and quarterback Mark Herman and a first-round pick in 1984. He went on to win 2 Super Bowls with the Denver Broncos and become a franchise quarterback. The Denver Broncos won that trade for sure. Justin, I'm going to venture to guess you weren't alive back when this trade was made, but I would imagine that it was pretty shocking for those of us, or for those of you who were.
Yeah, I mean, you don't even have to have been alive in 83 to understand the historical significance of this moment. One of the greatest to ever do it. I know a lot of the stat community and some of the modern stuff, people kind of try and poke holes in Elway's legacy, which I'll fight anybody any day, any time if they want to get into it. Just in terms of throwing a football, it's a short list of people that can even be compared to John Elway. But yeah, before the break, you said something along the lines of the Broncos wouldn't be who they are today without John Elway. I'd go so far as to say John Elway is the Denver Broncos. He is responsible for every success largely that this franchise has ever had, from a player to an executive to just being the face of the city. Like, the Denver Broncos are what they are today because of what he came in and did, which was just electrify a city for 2 decades, which is pretty dang cool.
Yeah. I mean, and not only that, I mean, he stuck around. He stayed in Denver. He's, obviously became the GM. He's very invested in the community. I mean, it goes beyond that. But like you look at it again, we have the ability, the privilege of being able to look back on this now and have some separation between when this trade happened and what everything happened after that, winning a couple Super Bowls, all of the things I just mentioned. But I think even in the moment, the Broncos felt like they were getting a good deal out of that, right? Like, yes, you're trading away, like I said, Chris Hinton, who was, Denver's first round pick in 1983, quarterback Mark Herman, and then your 1984 first round pick, who ended up being guard Ron Solt. But I mean, nothing matters if you end up with your version of a Patrick Mahomes, right? Like, nothing matters if you end up with your version of a Josh Allen, your version of what we hope to be Bo Nix, a franchise quarterback. I cannot stress enough the value of getting a franchise quarterback on a team, even a team that doesn't have a lot of other pieces, and seeing something like this, seeing a trade like this, the John Elway move, is living proof that a franchise quarterback, if you can find one of those, a needle in the haystack, nothing else matters. Nothing.
Yeah, I mean, he would have been, and this is a little bit tongue in cheek, but not, I kind of mean it. Like, he would have been worth your next 5 first-round picks. Like, whatever you want to throw out. In hindsight, obviously, it's easy to say that. You can't be making those type of deals in the moment, but his value, his impact for the franchise, even aside from the Super Bowls he won, look how many Super Bowls he took them to before they got to that moment. I mean, like, he made the Broncos one of the staples of the NFL, like what made them a premier franchise, made them a place where a guy like Peyton Manning would want to come and finish his career. And I mean, obviously he's fully embraced the Broncos organization. I know there's a lot of stuff that's involved with that, with Irsay and like his relationship with the Colts deteriorating. But I mean, like the impact, it's just astronomical. Like if you really want to nerd out, you'd be like, what was the economic impact of John Elway on like Colorado as a state? You could probably make an argument he's like as important as any project, any I-25 thing you've done. Like, he is
I like
state. Like, he's everything.
I like that. You know, you're going to start comparing economic impacts. I mean, you know, I know you hate to this subject, but like, you know, what's the economic impact that Coach Prime has made on CU, right? Like, it's one of those, that conversation of like, I mean, I saw an article come up that said like, you know, CU is basically like, Coach Prime is invaluable to CU. Like, they can't afford to lose him. John Elway built a lot of that for the Denver Broncos. I'd like to look on the flip side of this, though, for the Broncos, because, you know, the Broncos, we can talk about some of the good moves that the Broncos have made, and there have been really good trades that the Broncos have made that shocked a lot of people, that people felt good about. The biggest downside trade or move deal that the Broncos made, I don't know, was it really a trade? I can't even remember what the deal was specifically. Russell Wilson coming to the Denver Broncos had to be up there as just one of the most shocking moves that the Denver Broncos have made in recent history. And a lot of that was because of the potential upside that we thought we were going to get in Russell Wilson. I remember where I was. I was in a Safeway parking lot, and people started honking in the parking lot. I had like the radio turned on because I was in the car. So I turned the radio on to, you know, one of the sports radio stations here in Denver. And they're like screaming on the radio, just not even like, I couldn't understand what they were saying, just screaming on the radio. I think it was DMAC or something, literally just screaming. And people were honking. Like, I mean, it felt like we got our Peyton Manning. It felt like we got our John Elway. Obviously, it didn't work out that way, but from sheer shocking factor, that one was pretty high up there.
Yeah, I mean, I was in Las Vegas for the Mountain West tournament at the time. That was when Henry was still covering the Buffs, and we're like in Caesar's Palace, and we go to the NFL store, and they're like already starting to make Russell Wilson Broncos jerseys on the spot, and it's just like, this is surreal. Wow. Even though it didn't work out, I still think it was the right move. Like, obviously, it was a bold trade. It's a swing that I would have taken at the time because the Broncos were in purgatory, and we've talked about the impact of a John Elway and a franchise quarterback, and the reality is when you swing big like that, it is a gamble. Sometimes it's not going to work out in your favor. It certainly did not in that case, and we're still feeling the impact from a salary cap standpoint, but yeah, I mean, that's probably top 5 if we're just saying pure shock value, because that was one of those that kind of came out of nowhere too. Like, just wait, the Broncos did what today?
We thought we were going to get Aaron Rodgers. That was the thought.
That was the rumor.
Were going to go big, you know, like we thought they were with Nathaniel Hackett and all of that kind of stuff. We thought we were going to get Aaron Rodgers, and then all of a sudden you hear that Russell Wilson is coming to be a Denver Bronco. And I remember listening to not only our Broncos show, but a lot of the commentary around Denver, and a lot of people felt like this was a win. Again, you know, we were living in the bubble at that moment, and I think in the moment, like you just alluded to, it was the right move. It was the right decision. It was a shakeup that the Broncos needed. You got him for a pretty good deal. I think if you're looking back on anything, the immediate contract and like giving him that immediate contract was probably the worst decision out of those two, out of just signing him and then giving him an immediate contract before he'd even step foot.
But I mean, the trade was the trade's dependent on that. Russ doesn't agree to the trade if he knows if he doesn't get the extension. So I mean, it didn't work out. But I think you can see the logic at least. Like it wasn't one of those Rockies trades where you were just like, wait, we're doing what?
Yeah. Well, speaking, I mean, you were talking about your Portis jersey that you got during Christmas, and right after Russell Wilson signed, because we had just moved from Washington, and and my wife Marissa, she had watched the Seahawks for a little bit while we were living in Washington. She was like, all right, like I got to see Russell Wilson playing in Seattle. Now we get to see him with the Broncos. So she got all hyped and immediately got on a Russell Wilson Broncos jersey. And talk about the letdown after the last couple of years of that rolled out is we still have that Russell Wilson Broncos jersey. It's a gorgeous jersey too, sitting in the
I got one too, pristine condition, maybe worn 3 times.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, oh man, I like my Russell Wilson Seahawks jersey is more valuable than the Russell Wilson Broncos jersey. Yeah, that's a tough one to swallow, but that's the way sports go sometimes. And if nothing else, if the Broncos can lick their wounds and make Bo Nix their franchise quarterback, then all is forgiven, right? None of that really matters. I do, when we wrap up the show, I mean, part of this, I want to talk about some of the maybe non-trade deals, but just losing guys to free agency, signing guys out of free agency, some of those deals, because there are some interesting ones that come up. Bo Nix, I know he was on the list of guys that the Broncos were interested in at the time, but felt kind of shocking to me when they ended up getting him. I just remember like sitting there watching the draft and just not expecting to hear Bo Nix's name. Like I wasn't shocked by it by any means, but I wasn't like, oh, yep, that's who I expected. It was kind of like, oh, wow, the Broncos got Bo Nix. Interesting. Like that was a bit of a surprise. So it wasn't a trade, but I guess a little bit shocking that they ended up, going after Bo Nix, and Sean Payton obviously had a plan, and so far it's worked out.
Bo has already exceeded my expectations, so I mean it's gravy at this point. I'm really excited about what he has the opportunity to be. I think there are some physical limitations that he's going to have, and I think realistically, still I don't know, that you look back at that Chargers game that the Broncos lost in Los Angeles. There are some throws that Herbert makes in that game that just, again, like I said about Elway, there's a small select group of the population on planet Earth that can make a play like that. Bo Nix isn't making that type of play, but he's got it between the ears, and he's got a nice deep ball. He can scramble around. It's been fun. We've been pretty blessed when it comes to quarterback play in terms of having 2 of the top 10 quarterbacks that have ever played to win a Super Bowl for us. So it's just one of those that when you experience something like that, it's tough because it sets a standard that's almost impossible to live up to. And we haven't talked a lot about Nuggets trades yet, but I think about that with Nikola Jokic when he retires. How am I ever going to watch basketball again? We're watching it being played perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. That's true, man. And the Nuggets have some interesting vibes going on right now, but Nikola Jokic has just been a constant for years. So let's talk about the Nuggets after this break. We gotta mix in one last break here. After the break, we'll talk about the Nuggets and then some honorable mentions. Go down the list of some honorable mentions, most shocking trades, and then wrap things up. All right, back here on the Denver Sports Podcast, Christian Saez, Justin Michael, and the Nuggets. I think if you're going to talk about the Nuggets, and you already mentioned this, Justin, but the big one was getting Allen Iverson in the first place. And then I think you go a step beyond that and, saying the trade from Allen Iverson to Chauncey Billups. Probably that whole circulation there were the shocking Nuggets trades, at least that come to mind for me. Obviously, there's more to it than that. But the big ones for me were definitely Chauncey and Allen. Chauncey was NBA Finals MVP in 2004 before getting traded a couple years later to the Nuggets. That was pretty big. And having Allen Iverson was obviously just huge.
Yeah, I think there was a stretch at one point in 2007 where Melo and AI were both averaging like 30 points a game, two of the top 3 scorers in the league. It's a ton of fun. They don't really end up winning anything, so they flip him for Chauncey, CU kid, hometown, grew up in Denver. That's awesome. He takes you to the Western Finals. I hate thinking about that 2009 Lakers series, so we won't go down that path. But
although we've righted wrongs since then with the Lakers.
Yeah. I went through hell as a kid to get to where we're at now, so I'm going to enjoy every second of the salty Lakers experience in the year 2025.
Absolutely.
But I mean, there was a lot of stepping stones to get to this point. And I think you can kind of look at that AI trade. Then he obviously flips them for Billups, who's also a part of the Melo trade when they send Melo to New York. But unlike the Nolan Arenado trade, the Nuggets actually set themselves up, for success by getting Danilo Gallinari, by getting Wilson Chandler. They got a nice little haul for him, and they got a couple of first-round picks, a pick swap, which ultimately leads to Jamal Murray. I mean, in terms of losing the face of your franchise, it worked out about as well as you could hope for from the Nuggets standpoint. And they've just kind of continued it. But to me, like, it all kind of starts like you draft Melo, you make these big trades, which ultimately lead to moving on from Melo and your next generation, which transitions into Jokic. And you've made some moves since then, like bringing in Aaron Gordon. That's a great trade. Bringing in KCP at the time, like those are moves that ultimately lead to you winning a championship. Yeah, I don't know. I just threw a lot of information out, but I had a bunch of stuff in my notes, so I wanted to hit it.
I love it. You're prepared, man. I see, and that's the difference too. Is like, there you see the trickle effect, and that was part of the reasons I wanted to talk about this topic as a whole when I entered this show. Is just because I'm like, I want to see how that ripples down from this trade going into this trade, going into this trade. We talked earlier about Nolan Arenado and how that rippled down a lot for Rockies fans and how bitter that's made a lot of Rockies fans and all of the stuff that surrounds that. So the Nuggets have, I think, a positive effect. I actually would argue that the Nuggets and the Avs both are probably the most consistent around, like, when they were really bad, making some moves that allowed them to just slowly arch their way back up to being the powerhouse team that they are now. And the Rockies, and even the Broncos, but especially the Rockies, like, kind of went the opposite, right? Like, they were good, and then they just like made some really bad moves that now have landed them where they are.
I think that's spot on. I mean, like, we went back through the history and back to the Patrick Waugh trade, which is probably the first most significant trade in Avs history. And then we talked about a bunch after that, but very similar with the Nuggets. Like, they've hit on a lot of these big, significant moves at key moments in their franchise history. And that goes back even pre-Melo. Like, you look at 1980, they trade for Alex English, who's probably the greatest player in franchise history outside of Nikola Jokic. George McInnes for him 1-for-1. That's a massive deal. And they traded Kiki Vandeweghe in like 84 after he was scoring like 30 points a game for 3 guys. And then they won 50 plus games, went to the Western Conference Finals. It seems like they've had a good pulse of when it's time to move on from superstars and when it's time to potentially make a major shakeup. And they've hit on a lot of these key moves. Yeah,
I agree with you. I wanted to talk a little bit about the honorable mentions. If there's other guys on the list, other trades on the list. We'd talk Portis for Champ, Matt Holliday for Cargo, or Cargo for Matt Holliday, Russell Wilson, Ubaldo Jimenez. Were there any other like trades that kind of just caused you to stop for a moment, like, open your eyes again and be like, huh, is that real? Like, did that actually happen? Any other honorable mentions you want to throw out there?
I mean, we didn't talk about the Tulo move, which felt inevitable at the time. I mean, he was a disgruntled superstar, but again, felt like another classic Rockies moment of that's what we got for trades. Jose Reyes. I mean, I was excited about Jeff Hoffman, and he's ended up being a good pitcher, just not with the Rockies, unfortunately.
It's just it's so depressing because I mean, I cover the Rockies. It's my team, and just remembering all of these things, rehashing all this, like opening old wounds. It's tough. It is really tough. And the Rockies tend to be a team that also, like, guys end up becoming good when they leave. There have been some good guys. Obviously, Nolan was, good when he was still with the Rockies. But then you see guys who were like average or subpar on the Rockies, and then they go leave get traded away or
Jake
whatever. And they end up,
McGee.
yeah. And you're like, why are they just now playing really good? That's just the way it is for Rockies fans. Were there players that, and this isn't trade specifically, but were there players that you remember losing to free agency? I mean, I would almost even argue that Rantanen felt kind of this way because there was a lot of money involved, where you just lost to free agency because of financial reasons that hurt, that stuck with you for a while.
Off the top of my head, I mean, like I was really emotionally attached to that Nuggets championship winning team. So like even somebody small like Bruce Brown moving on.
That was mine. Yep.
You understood it, but it's like, oh, that hurts. We're losing Brucey B. There've been a lot of Avs over the years, both free agency and trade. They traded Alex Tanguay in 2004, and he was a big part of some of their early success. One of my favorite players. Having to see Peter Forsberg in a Flyers jersey was just sickening. Like it felt so wrong. Those are the ones that come to mind. When it comes to whatever free agency, for whatever reason, like I feel like the positives stick out more to me. Like when they bring in Broncos signed Peyton Manning, like bringing in Wes Welker, like it was just like, oh my God, like we're on a heater right now.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I even think like, on the positive end of this, like bringing in like Russell Westbrook was, a good move. That the Nuggets are now feeling positive effects of getting a NBA All-Star player, a former NBA All-Star player who's at the end of his career, the latter half of his career, wrapping up his successful years in a Denver Nuggets uniform. Like that's pretty cool. I remember Nazem Kadri was tough for me because I had, like I said, moved to Colorado, didn't have an NHL team that I watched growing up because I was in Seattle before the Kraken became a thing. So the Avs became my adopted team, and the Avs immediately won a Stanley Cup the year I moved here, which was incredible. But Kadri, just the emotions around that, and like, the hate that he was getting throughout that series, and then him going and having that hat trick. I don't remember what game that was, but regardless. And then, again, understandable when he ended up leaving the Avs, when the Avs had to part ways with him. It wasn't like it was a surprise. It just was more of like, damn, like I enjoyed getting to watch him play hockey in my first year as an Avs fan.
It's the toughest part of being a winner, right? Is everybody wants to get paid at some point, and you end up losing key pieces. As like the longer you sustain success, the more challenging it becomes to do it with those same guys. And that's what makes all these moments so significant. Is while you might understand the business side of it, there's all this emotion that gets wrapped up in it. And that's why, like, even if you understand the logic from what the Avalanche were doing with Mikko Rantanen, it still sucks. I mean, that's the Moose. Like, top 10 in goals scored, top 10 in plus minus, top 10 in playoff points. Like
we have t-shirts for him.
Part.
Yeah. I mean, like we've got designs and swag and all. Yeah. It's tough to swallow. It's why I wanted to talk about this on the show, because it's just one of those parts of the game that, it's inevitable.
Broncos trading Von Miller. We didn't bring up that one. Like it made sense at the time.
True.
But it's like, man, that's the end of an era. Like it always, those ones always hit harder when it's been somebody that's been there through multiple generations of life. Like, I'm watching Von Miller throughout high school, like college, in the dorms, and the Super Bowl. Like that, he was a big part of so many massive memories for me.
Yeah.
And I'd say the same thing about Mikko.
Watching Ken Griffey Jr. play in a Reds uniform, in a Cincinnati Reds uniform, was like stabbing myself in the eye with a knife. I mean, like I'm like turning on my TV. I'm like, why is Ken Griffey Jr. wearing red? Like what are we doing here? Growing up in Seattle. So yeah, I get it. I will say, like, if you look at some of the, especially the Rock
card here for you.
Oh, there you go. Did you see, by the way, just while you're on cards, did you see the Paul Skeens card got drawn by like that 11-year-old, and the 11-year-old decided to go?
Allegedly, we didn't see the photos. There's a conspiracy going on.
Of course there's conspiracy going on, but the kid's from LA. He's probably a Dodgers fan, so I hate him already, but it's a whole other show.
The rich get richer. It's how it works.
Yeah, we'll do a TDSP on baseball cards and stuff one day.
That'd be fun.
That would be good. We'll take that note down. For the Rockies though, like I am just praying, and we've asked this like to when doing our media scrums with Bill Schmidt and all of them, like, hey, like when are you going to sign Brenton Doyle to an extension? When are you going to sign, or how are you going to make sure that the guys that you have that are good on your team now, like the few of them that are good on your team now, stay in a Rockies uniform? And it seems like I'd like to say that they've learned their lessons, that they're not going to like let Brenton Doyle walk because of a contract dispute or whatever. But until that announcement comes, I'm holding my breath a little bit on some of the guys that the Rockies have, just because it's like you hold on to everything that you can get. I mean, this is a team that just lost 200 plus games in the last 2 years. You gotta take your wins when you can get them. And right now you got a couple guys on your team that are fun to watch, and that's about all you have.
The only way out is to rebuild. Like, the Rockies aren't a premier free agent destination. I think Denver's a good spot. I think if they start having some success, like I think that could change. But as is, I don't think they're a team that's respected in baseball. They haven't made the most of their homegrown talent. They haven't been able to build off of it. And like that's the difference between them and the Nuggets. Like the Nuggets were pretty ugly there in the late 90s, early 2000s, pre-Melo. They have used homegrown talent and key moves with that homegrown talent when it was time to move on from certain pieces to build this franchise. Like you look, Jokic, Murray, MPJ, all of these guys are homegrown. They trade for Gordon. They made pieces here and there. That has to be the Rockies. They have to be able to hit through the draft and like build yourself organically. Or I don't know what you're going to do. Or you end up signing has-beens like Chris Bryant for way too much money because you're trying to make some type of big swing. Like I get the logic behind it. They've always kind of had at least one superstar that sells tickets and, brings everybody to the ballpark. But I just hope we see a more modern approach, I guess I would say, from the Rockies, and we'll see.
We're all hoping Chase Dollander is the next Paul Skeens. That's what we're all hoping for. Fingers crossed we get to see him in a Rockies uniform this year. But got to wrap things up here on the show. Justin, appreciate you taking the time, man. Great insight as always, and fun topic. I mean, like I said, I know we've talked about this at some point in the past on TDSP, but it's nice to go kind of run down memory lane and get to rehash some old positives and negatives across our Colorado sports teams.
This is a blast, man. Anytime you want me, I'm here. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. You're killing it on the Rockies beat. Anybody listening is probably already familiar, but if you're here because of me on the CSU or Avalanche side, check out what he's doing with the Rockies, because he has made that show a whole lot of fun again, and that's not easy to do.
I appreciate it. We're grinding over there, man. It's almost baseball season. We're ready for it. I'm ready for the weather that comes along with baseball season as well. But yeah, shout out to Alyssa for pressing the buttons today, staying warm over there in the corner. Appreciate you guys hanging out with us in the Toyota chat and beyond. We'll see you guys next time on the Denver Sports Podcast.
We all silly like the mayor.